Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I begin, I just want to take a minute and thank the minister and his team for being here. I know you're busy people and it's a challenge. I also want to congratulate the minister on becoming a grandfather recently. I believe that's something new in his life, and from a person that's experienced that recently as well. Best thing ever, right, Mr. Minister? I just want to congratulate you on that. Minister, just over a year ago, we actually were able to meet in person in the committee room in Ottawa, and as we discussed the estimates from the mains for this year and subs from the year before. And you and I had a conversation that time about the philosophy of you working towards eventually ending the role of Indigenous services and Indigenous communities gradually taking over their services and becoming independent. It was you and I had an interaction around the number of jobs that were being added and some of those kinds of things, and we talked about that. Beyond the growth of kind of people in the department, there's been some increase in spending, which, I mean, understandably in COVID, there was, like you said, $4 billion there, but we're also talking about $2 billion over the last 2 years, I believe. A couple other things that I would just throw into the mix here. There's been some really, really significant lost generational opportunities. Keystone XL being one of them for 5 First Nations in Alberta and my province of Saskatchewan. Last week's announcement of the Chevron Canada not being able to find investors for their Kitimat LNG project. And again, a generational opportunity that's lost for 15 First Nations. I've just heard from many Indigenous organizations as I've engaged them about the investment environment being very, very difficult to proceed with projects. I couldn't help but notice in the 2021 department plan, unlike the 2022 21-22 department plan, unlike the 2021 plan where you, in your letter, you referred to this philosophical desire to kind of end the existence of the department. We don't see that in the 2022 plan. A meeting I had last week with one Indigenous economic development leader told me the only solution to solve all of the socioeconomic issues in our communities is jobs. So my philosophical question for you is, can you explain how the goal of Indigenous self-determination and the elimination of your department long-term can ever transpire without economic prosperity in the communities?
Well, thank you, MP Vidal. You touched on an exceedingly large number of interlocking and important points, and I don't see them as philosophical. I see them as everyday practical points, particularly as you see increased funding going through, not only through the pandemic, but to address a number of longstanding issues, which is the main mandate of which goes through my letter, and the department's mandate, which is to close socioeconomic gaps. So as you see large investments in health, large investments in education, large investments in infrastructure, all elements that are key to closing those socioeconomic gaps, we have to look at ourselves as a department and ask ourselves, are we doing this in the right way? And how does that start? It starts with trusting the voices on the ground that you hear, a number of the ones that you talked to, MP Vidal, and doing infrastructure, health, and education transformation in the way that moves towards self-determination, as encompassed in UNDRIP, as encompassed in a lot of the relationships that we entertain with Indigenous peoples. And we've seen the real net effects of that through COVID. We know that solutions, when they are implemented on the ground, Indigenous peoples know how best to protect their people in a once-in-a-lifetime epidemic. It goes through self-government and it goes through self-determination. So all those elements of economic prosperity tie into your overarching point, MP Vidal, which is, yes, jobs, but also fostering economic parity among Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, and that's the mandate of the department.
Thank you. So let me just drill a little further into that. Then in the 2021 department plan, under a section called Enabling Economic Prosperity, you talk about supporting capacity building efforts by leveraging greater access to capital. And I just share a quick story from my own riding where a very, very incredible opportunity for an Indigenous-led group of First Nations, 12 First Nations in Northern Saskatchewan are looking to invest in an incredible opportunity that's going to be hugely successful. The private industry is all over this if they don't get into it, but yet in the context of reaching out to the exact organizations that you refer to in the department plan, they have not been able to secure any opportunity to gain any equity investment. And I just keep coming back to the fact that it's the equity investment, the opportunity that they have to create own source revenue to help themselves is critical. But yet when they actually have an incredible project where they could do that, that door is being slammed in their face. And that's just a bit of a frustration on the ground, as you talked about.
Yeah, and I'll briefly respond. I get it. Look, whether it's equity investments, whether it's Indigenous big business, small business, or medium business, we know that that access to capital has not been there. We've seen those tailored supports that Indigenous Services Canada and the Government of Canada has had to deploy to allow Indigenous businesses, Indigenous innovation to thrive. I hope to see that continue. And these are always conversations that need to happen on many levels and across many levels of government as Indigenous communities are investing and are a bright light in the future in terms of own source revenue, which I would note has been extremely hard hit throughout this pandemic. And as it diversifies and as it becomes a support in the community, we see those programs that it supports. So you'll find no objection from me.
Can I squeeze